Good evening and good morning, everybody. So there's people in the UK and Europe, I think, joining us as well. So welcome to Soil Yourself September. So this is a Flinders and Deakin University collaboration born out of the Grounded Minds Consortium. And we set this up earlier in 2025 to explore and research the soil, gut and mind connection. First, I'd like to acknowledge that we're hosting this series from Adelaide, also known as Tandanya, which is the land of the Ghana people. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and share my appreciation for their deep relationship with the land, sea, and air. The series is about something incredibly important, so it centers around soils. And at first glance, soils are often seen as just the material that we walk on or in which plants grow. But if you dig a little deeper, and literally that is, it becomes clear that soils are the foundations of terrestrial life. So they're inherently relational as well. They're a conglomerate of physical, chemical, and biological components. And in terms of life, there's a lot going on in soils, or at least there should be in healthy soils. So something like 59 to 99% of our planet's species live in soils. They provide food, for instance, 95% of our calories-ish are supported by soils. They filter our water, support biodiversity that makes ecosystems thrive. And the story doesn't stop in the ground. So the health of soils is intimately connected to our own health. Now, from a big picture perspective, this is clear. So we depend on healthy soils for food that keeps us alive and healthy. And there are many indirect roles that soils play in our lives. Now, a growing body of research shows that what we eat shapes our health and well-being, both physical and mental. And we're constantly learning new things about this relationship. For example, you can refer to the field of nutritional psychiatry for how food influences our mood. And this field was pioneered by Professor Felice Jacka. So admitting a couple of people. So she founded the Grounded Minds Consortium, but there's a growing body of science that shows that microbes living in soils influence the health of the plants that we eat and the microbes living inside us. These invisible friends, they shape our immune systems and regulate inflammation, digest our foods and provide us with nutrients, influence how our body's cells communicate with each other, and probably affect how we think and feel via what's called the gut-brain axis. And this is a two-way communication system that links our gastrointestinal systems to our brains. In other words, healthy soils, with all their diverse microbial life forms, grow healthy plants, but they also help grow healthy people. Over the next month, you'll hear from a lineup of incredible speakers. So we have scientists and practitioners and thought leaders, each exploring different aspects of this soil-gut-brain connection. Now, some of the talks will focus on the relationship as a whole, and others will be more focused on a particular component of this relationship. So last night's talk, we had Dr. Alice Martin talking about the gut microbiome. So there are 12 talks over the course of September, and it'd be great if you could attend several, if not all of the talks, if you're able to. And this way you can start to see the different components of this relationship and how they connect together. The talks will be recorded, so you can watch them back on YouTube. We hope that Soil Yourself September sparks conversations and inspires action. So thanks to everybody for joining on this journey, and I invite you to listen and question and connect, and most of all, think about soils and our guts and our mental health and all of the connections in between. And this is just a big shout out to Ruben, who has been my partner in crime, helping to organise this series. So thanks to Ruben. And everyone's mics have been muted, but please add questions to the chat and I'll read them out to our speaker at the end. With that, let's welcome our first speaker of the day. And there we go. So the wonderful Eli Court. So Eli's the CEO of the hugely important organisation Soils for Life, an independent non-profit organisation that works to support Australian farmers to regenerate soils for resilient people, communities, businesses and landscapes. So Eli is a skilled communicator, a builder of bridges and a person who loves to bring people together to work towards a common cause. He understands the reality and challenges of farming and is deeply committed to soil and landscape restoration and to seeing regional communities benefit from the opportunities that regenerative approaches to agriculture offer. So without further ado, over to you, Eli.
Thank you very much, Jake.
Just a reminder, you haven't shared your screen yet either.
Yeah, no worries. And thanks everyone for showing up for the talk on an evening, or for most of you on an evening. I'm not sure what time it is in the Netherlands, but thank you to you, Simone, for coming in from the Netherlands. And I would just also say, I understand people are often running around at this time of night, but if you're not and you feel like sharing your video, it's always nice to speak to faces. So I would love to see some more faces and video turned on. Thanks, Stacey. Hello. So thank you for that intro, Jake. I'm going to share my screen. So tonight I am going to start with a little bit of an introduction to soil. Surprise, surprise. And we all know, I guess, what soil is, right? There it is. But as Jake said, soil is so much more than just dirt. Soil is the basis of all living things. And, you know, I've seen it said it supports 98% of life on Earth. I can't imagine what that 2% is that soil doesn't support. It really is the foundation. This is soil. Soil is alive. Soil is not just a dead medium. Soil is alive. A teaspoon of soil, just 1 teaspoon, can contain 10 billion living organisms. And they're weird and amazing. This is a picture of potworm. It feeds on decaying plant material, fungi and bacteria in the soil. And creatures like these in the soil ecosystem do all of the work to make the soil the living, fertile basis of life on Earth. So we're going to take a little bit of a closer look at the amazing organisms that live in the soil. So this is one of them. This is an incredible photo that was taken on a farm. I can't actually remember where this farm was, but we brought a photographer over from the UK a couple of years ago, and we went around on farms that we work with and dug up soil. And this was one of the creatures we found. Now, I don't know if people have done Zoom polls before, but I'm going to launch one and let's see what pops up. So the question I want you to answer is, how big is it? Simple question, and it's a multiple choice question. So is it smaller than 0.1 millimeter? Is it smaller than 1 millimeter? Or is it smaller than 10 millimeters? And if you'd like, you can also have a guess at its name. We'll see how many soilies we have in the audience. I'll just give you a second. So smaller than 0.1 millimeter is the front runner at the moment. No one thinks it's smaller than 10 millimeters. Not a single answer. Okay, now, can everyone actually see the responses there?
I can.
No one else can. I don't know how to actually show. So what we have is 56% of people saying that it's smaller than 0.1 and 44% saying it's smaller than 1 millimeter, and no one's saying it's smaller than 10 millimeters. Let me see if I can share the results with you. There you go. So those are the results. Now, this creature is actually 0.5 millimeters. It's about the length of the edge of a credit card. So it's a tiny creature, and it is called the snout mite, but I like to call it the bubble tea killer, because what the snout mite does is it wanders around in the soil and it finds prey and it stabs them with that distinctive snout, and then it sucks out their insides, just like bubble tea, only way more gruesome. So that's the snout mite. We're going to play that game a couple more times, but before we do, I just want to give you a bit of a sense of dimension. So a grape is about 30 millimeters, a sesame seed is about 2 millimeters, a human hair is about 0.02 millimeters. So that will give you a bit of help in thinking through the next couple of creatures that we're looking at. And I want to add one question to the next couple of creatures we're going to look at, and that is, what's their job in the soil? And I'm going to give you a bit of a helping hand here. So there are a few key jobs that soil organisms play. to make a healthy, functioning soil ecosystem. The first is recyclers, and their job is to break down dead stuff and recycle it so it's available for other uses. The next job is builders, and their job, like earthworms and dung beetles, is to make tunnels, take nutrients from one place to the other, move them from up high to down low, from down low to up high, and to make lots of nice tunnels that allow air and water to get into the soil. The next job is the hunters, and they are the creatures that eat other critters like the snout mite we just saw, including creatures that might be parasitic for plants, or that might be, not positive for agriculture. And the last job is the traders, and they share nutrients, often swapping nutrients with plant roots in return for the things that they need. So those are the 4 jobs. And I'm going to give you another little soil organism to look at and answer those 2 questions. So where has the poll disappeared to? Just a moment. Here we go. So the next poll. So how big is it? And what's its job? And then if you finish quickly in the chat, you can have a go at naming this little guy. You can give it a funny name if you like. The tiger lily, that's lovely. All right, I'm going to give you 1 more minute. Get your answers in. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So pretty even spread, really. So here are the answers. It's 2 millimeters, the size of a sesame seed. And this is one of my absolute favorite soil organisms. There are many, many different kinds of them. This is just one kind, a globular springtail. And this is an example of a recycler. So we did all right. 31% of people thought that this was the recycler. And it goes around, it eats poo and fungi and dead stuff and recycles it and makes it available for other creatures. And the interesting thing about a springtail is that it has a little coiled up little stick, like a pogo stick in the back of its body. And when it gets disturbed, it will release that stick like a spring. It's all sort of coiled up and ready to go. And it'll release that stick like a spring, and it'll make it fly up in the air and often do somersaults and disappear from its predators. And often if you dig into healthy soil, you will find springtails bouncing around. You can actually see them with the naked eye. They're very small, but you can see them. All right, you're getting the hang of it now. I'm going to stop sharing that poll and we're going to move on to the next one. So the next one, oh my God, hopefully nobody saw that. So same question. How big is it and what's its job? Have I launched it? I haven't launched it. There we go. This one is probably a little bit easy. How big is it? It's not exactly charismatic megafauna. But who wouldn't love this? Beautiful thing. Okay, I'll give you another couple of seconds to get your answers in. And if you like, yeah, you can give it a name in the chat as well. A few people are onto this one. So here are the results. So people are right on the money when it comes to how big is it. It is actually 0.02 millimeters, about the width of a human hair, and it is correct. It is an amoeba, and It's got the nickname of the deadly hugger because its method of it is a hunter, and its method of hunting is to actually morph its body around smaller creatures, and you can see that in this picture, and then just slowly absorb the creature inside its own body. A deadly, unfriendly hug, really. No mouth, that's the only way it can eat. So, oh no, I went too far. No, I didn't. I'm just going to show you this one. I'm going to tell you what it is. It's a peacock spider. This is the most beautiful creature I've ever seen come out of the soil. And it is a peacock spider. There are many, many different types of peacock spiders. This is just an incredibly beautiful one that we found on a farm. The peacock spider, I call it the risky show-off because it actually has a mating display, a very beautiful mating display that it uses its beautiful body to show off. But if the female doesn't like the mating display, then she brutally attacks and consumes the male. A very brutal creature. Anyway, okay, thank you for participating in that. So, as I said, like that's some of what lives in the soil, and that's only a tiny fraction. There are just so many incredible, curious, weird, amazing creatures that live in the soil, and they make up an incredibly complex soil ecosystem. And it's those creatures and many, many, many more that live in the soil that make it function and actually enable it to support all of the life above the ground. So plants depend on fertile soil. And soil creates, filters and stores clean water. It's like a giant hidden underground dam protected from evaporation in the harsh Australian sun. Forests depend on soil. And of course, we depend on soil for our food. Topsoil, which is the top 10 to 20 centimetres of soil, is where 95% of our food grows. And all of the activity of all those little creatures that we saw in the soil, they create the nutrients that plants turn into healthy food for all of us. And for all of these reasons, soil is important. And this is why my organisation, Soils for Life, was founded in 2013 by this guy, Major General Michael Jeffrey, a military man, funnily enough, but someone who came from agricultural roots and who saw soil and soil security as the foundation of our response to the world's 6 existential challenges. So Soils for Life was born. We're an independent non-profit organisation. We work to support Australian farmers to regenerate soils. But our soil is under threat. Australia loses an estimated 2.9 billion tonnes of soil to erosion every year. I heard a quote recently that I think that was your quote, Jake, that for every kilo of food that we produce, we lose, did you say 3 or 5 kilos of topsoil?
Not sure I said that, but
okay, maybe it was someone else. But I think it's 3 or 5 kilos of topsoil is lost for every kilo of food that we produce. An estimated 40% of the world's farming land has already been abandoned as it's no longer fertile, and 40 to 60% of what's left is degraded. So, our soils are in trouble. The good news is that there's growing interest amongst farmers about how they can take better care of the soil, and more than half of Australia is managed by farmers. So what they do counts. I guess what you see here is what I would call the mainstream approach to agriculture, which really looks at agriculture like you would look at a factory. And the way that works is that inputs go in the form of fertilizer and machinery and capital and chemicals, and products come out the other end, food and fiber and oils and, flowers and so many other products, but also waste and pollution come out the other end. And we know that there are plenty of ways in which modern agriculture has an impact on the environment, whether it be soil erosion, or chemicals that are toxic to soil biodiversity and to above ground biodiversity, those chemicals and fertilizers washing into waterways, and also habitat destruction when vegetation is cleared for agriculture. But, and I should say, like any other factory, agriculture is usually viewed as mutually inconsistent with nature. So nature happens where the farm factory isn't, and we achieve sustainability by either minimizing or ideally eliminating the negative impacts of the farm factory. So this is kind of the typical paradigm of agriculture and agricultural sustainability that we see in a lot of sustainability conversations. Now, I don't have a background in farming or soil science or landscape management, actually, so I've been probably on a learning journey in the last 5 years since I've been working in this space. But when I first started working in this space, I started asking around who are the most sustainable farmers in Australia? And the names that got put forward to me and the people that I went and visited, many of them were practicing a form of farming that was broadly referred to as regenerative agriculture. And these farmers aimed to go further than just reducing the negative impact of their farming practices on the environment. Their goal was actually to use their farming practices to improve the land and to regenerate the land. And this is one of them, Maddie Pershouse. And they were approaching this, they were approaching that goal by basically trying to mimic and work with rather than against nature. So instead of buying expensive synthetic fertilizers, they were rebuilding the natural fertility of the soil and the land. Instead of killing pests and pathogens with expensive and toxic chemicals, they were focusing on improving plant health and improving plants' defenses to these problems and rebuilding the populations of natural predators to help control them. And one farmer I visited early on, his name was Charlie Maslin, this is him. And Charlie raises sheep for wool and beef cattle on the Monero High Plains in New South Wales. And when I visited, the farm was absolutely bursting with life. The paddocks were exploding with a diverse mix of shoulder high grasses that was fringed with trees. The creeks ran clear and they hummed loudly with insects and birds and frogs. It was really quite an amazing experience. And I saw at least 5 platypuses paddling around in a dam on his farm. And that's 5. I'm just going to play that again because it's just so lovely. That's 5 more platypuses than I had seen in a lifetime of visiting national parks, which was pretty amazing. And as we walked around that property, Charlie talked to me about the importance of water in the landscape. And he explained how prior to European arrival, most creeks in Australia were chains of connected ponds. And when it rained, the ponds filled up and the water slowly seeped out into the landscape and absorbed into the soil like a sponge. And then protected in the soil there from the harsh sun and from the wind, the water supported plant growth through dry periods. And in turn, the plants kept the soil covered and prevented that water from evaporating. The arrival of European farmers pretty much destroyed all of this. Trees were cleared, sheep and cows brought in, and the livestock were penned into big fence paddocks. So when drought came, unable to migrate to greener pastures like they might in a natural system, the animals ate everything, starting with the most palatable native grasses, which soon disappeared. And then a vicious cycle. Without growing plants, the soil's exposed to the sun. It dries up, it blows away. Then when the rains finally come, the unprotected soil washes away and it erodes the banks of the creeks, it erodes the rivers, it leaves really nothing behind. And photos taken from Charlie's place around the time he took over showed that, like a lot of other farms, was really highly degraded. It actually looked like a moonscape. And Charlie's life's work, this is his place, his life's work's been to reverse the damage. He blocked up the drained creeks. He allowed the original chains of ponds to rebuild. He slowed the flow of water during rain events and gave the parched soils time to rehydrate. And that allowed the grasses to start recolonizing. And one of the amazing things that I've heard in story after story after story of regenerative farming is that after decades, or sometimes more than 100 years, some of the native seeds that had not been seen in that area for decades germinated and took root. And that's, I think, just such a hopeful thing that seed of regeneration is just sitting there waiting for the right management. And Charlie's grazing animals were his number one tool for landscape repair. And again, that meant mimicking natural cycles by moving the animals around the property, allowing them to graze one area for a very short time, and then moving them on. And that, that is the behavior of grazing animals in the wild, because they are prey species. They don't hang around because they're being preyed on. And the animals fertilize the soil with their dung and urine, but then the land's left to rest for long periods before they return. That was quite an amazing experience. And in the years since that, I've met hundreds more farmers with stories like Charlie's, every one of them a story of reversing the damage and regenerating the soil, regenerating the land. And they all have one thing in common. I mean, it's different in every different place. No farm is alike, no paddocks alike, no soil is alike, but they all have one thing in common, which is rebuilding diversity, working with natural systems, finding better ways to grow the things we want, rather than finding ever more destructive ways to kill the things we don't want. One of the farmers we work with, David Marsh, he often says that the trend of life on Earth is towards ever increasing complexity and diversity, and regenerative agriculture aims to mimic that trend. Industrial agriculture does the opposite. It creates simplified systems like factories and has a focus on scale and efficiency, and that favours monocultures, producing one thing in one area, large, consistent volumes that can then be sold into commodity markets. And there's good reason for why farmers do that. It's because that's the way the market's set up. It's the way the system is set up. But nature hates a monoculture. You don't really see monocultures in nature. Plants in monocultures don't get what they need to be healthy and defend themselves against pests and diseases. And monocultures deplete the fertility of the land, basically mining nutrients without replacing them. Natural systems cycle nutrients, and monocultures really extract nutrients. And what happens in a monoculture system and in an industrial system is that farmers need to use ever more chemicals to deal with pests and diseases, ever more synthetic fertilizers and other inputs to deal with declining fertility. And as the ecology declines, more inputs are required, which in turn drives more degradation, and it's just a vicious downward spiral. And many farmers who farm in that way, so they feel like they're on a treadmill. They're needing to run faster and faster to stay in the same place. And some, farmers that have moved to a different approach, they've cheekily described it as moron agriculture. So every time there's a problem, just put more on. And, that's sort of cheeky way of describing it, but I think it's a really challenging squeeze that a lot of farmers are under, and they're forced into this treadmill where they need to put ever more on. And so a regenerative approach to agriculture tries to address this by focusing on rebuilding the soil ecosystem. So I guess when I started meeting these farmers and I started learning about ecological approaches to agriculture, I thought, well, maybe I'm actually thinking about agriculture all wrong. This separation between agriculture and the environment, maybe that's not the right way to think about it. And I guess in one sense, I thought agriculture is actually simply growing plants and raising animals. And if you think about it, nature is also really just about growing plants and raising animals. A wondrous, amazing multitude of plants and animals of every kind imaginable, but using regenerative principles, moving away from monoculture, reintroducing diversity. I realized like farming could be entirely consistent with nature. They don't need to be mutually exclusive. And that opens up a whole new way of thinking, I think, about soil and about conservation and about regeneration, because where we once thought, well, we have to find a way to give back some of the land that we use for agriculture to nature, this opens up all of our agricultural lands, which is more than half of the country, as the potential for land that can play host to biodiversity and can be part of our response to the nature crisis. So last year, I attended a conference on a cattle station near Longreach. It was in central Queensland. It was called the Regenerative Rangelands Conference. It was organised by a wonderful lady, Jodie Brown, who owns the station, and around 50 people there, mostly graziers in big hats and jeans. And as a city boy, raised in Melbourne, who lives in Melbourne, I was on the bill to speak, but I felt a little bit out of place. And on the first morning, we were sitting on plastic chairs in this marquee, and the MC asked everyone to share a cherished childhood memory. And the memory that came to me, it was from a walk with my mum. It was in a national park when I was quite young. I remember it was quite warm, it was raining, and we were walking along. My mum bent down and scraped up a handful of soil from the floor of the forest, and she held up the soil for me to smell, and it was sweet and it was earthy. It's got that beautiful soily smell, which we now know is caused by the actinomycetes bacteria that lives in healthy soil. And I've never forgotten that smell. And other people got up and shared memories, and a common thread emerged. Almost every story was a story of happy times in nature with family. And my happy memories were in national parks, but I realized that most of these farmers had memories of nature that were on the farm. And it kind of clicked for me that as a city kid, my only opportunities to experience nature were on holidays in national parks. And so naturally, I thought that's where nature was. But these farmers knew that farms could be a place where nature thrived. And Jodie Brown, the owner of this station, got up and described her vision for the 45,000 acres of outback that her family manages. And I'll just quote what she said. She said, she wants to see a diverse kaleidoscope biologically, a mosaic of soil, pasture, and vegetation that's spiraling upwards, productive in terms of pasture and abundant in terms of providing habitat for wildlife, lots of birds and good water with ample shade trees and a reliable climate. And I just thought to myself, these are not the words of an environmental vandal. Like, farmers can really be our greatest ally in the fight to save our soils. And I don't think Jodie is alone in any way. Like, most farmers absolutely care for the land and want to leave it better than they left it, better than than it was when they received it. So the work we do at Soils for Life aims to help farmers who are now, I would say, increasingly curious about how they can become better soil stewards, help them move from that curiosity to being confident and ready to take what is often a risk and often a cost involved in changing the way they farm. And we do that by telling inspiring and engaging stories of regenerative farming, by making regenerative agriculture feel safe, providing trusted information and independent expertise that supports practice change, by putting them together with one another to develop the new skills and knowledge they need, and by using our on-ground work to build a better evidence base showing how farmers anywhere can regenerate soil and make their businesses and landscapes more resilient, and sharing that evidence base with government and industry and the research community as well. and partnering with researchers like we're doing with the Grounded Mind Consortium that Jake mentioned. So I will end there. Thank you. Get in touch, and yeah, very happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Ellie. That was amazing. Really engaging talk. So we have a question in the chat. You mentioned that they grow food that we, the consumers, want, but how different would a supermarket look if these farmers grew what the land wants? Nice question.
That's a good question. I mean, I don't necessarily know how different a supermarket needs to look. There is one thing, so you know, we can grow any of the products that are on the shelves of supermarkets in a way that depletes soil health or a way that builds soil health. I'm very confident of that. Um, and so I think, you know, whatever's available on the shelves of the supermarkets could still be available if all farmers move to a more regenerative approach to farming. I think one thing that might change is the sort of information that we have about the health benefits of the different foods on the shelves. Because right now, we don't really have information as consumers about how the food on the shelves of the supermarket was produced, unless that food is labelled organic or biodynamic, in which case we know that it was grown without, in the case of organic, without synthetic inputs. But some of the emerging research that's coming out of the States and around the world, but particularly in the US, is showing that the way that food is grown can be quite significantly influential on the nutritional value of that food. And there are people working on trying to understand, well, what's the variability of different nutrients in food? How does that relate to the way that the food was grown? And how can we measure that and provide that information to people shopping in the supermarket? And actually, there's a handheld tool that has been built that you can point at a carrot or a tomato or a cucumber or whatever, and it'll give you a readout of the different nutrients in that product. At the moment, the gap is we don't know what good looks like. So it'll give you a number for the amount of antioxidants in a carrot, but it won't tell you whether that's in the top 5% for all carrots or the top 10% or the top 50% or, you know, whatever it is. So I think that's something that could potentially change, is better information about how the food was grown, about the nutritional density of the food as a result of how it was grown. But yeah, I think we can grow anything that we want in a way that is consistent with nature.
Nice, thanks. Next one. So there are key examples of incredible farming. Charles Massey, Pete Andrews, Colin Sayce, who have shown their boundary fences as examples of their neighbours' poor practices compared to their improved land, especially during droughts. What conversations need to happen to get people on board, even if they won't move when they can see the difference?
Look, I guess one way of thinking about this is, you know, I don't know if you've seen the bell curve of diffusion of new innovations, but that tends to identify people who are innovators, a very small number of people who are innovators, and then a larger group of people who are early adopters, and then the bulk of people in the middle of the bell curve, the majority, the early majority and the late majority, and then there are sort of late adopters and the laggards. And some people, you know, are just not going to change until the very bitter end. And I honestly wouldn't try to force it. So I think there's a group of people who might be, you know, very resistant, and you know, I wouldn't try to force it. I guess the sorts of conversations that need to happen with the curious, open-minded people, which I would say is most people, curious, open-minded, but need the confidence, you know, need to feel like if they're going to invest some of their time, if they're going to invest some of their money, if they're going to take a risk on doing something different, and also often run into some social barriers to changing, because, you know, there's a normal way to farm, and people do encounter a bit of social pressure not to change. If they're going to do that, they need to feel confident that it's going to work. And so the part of that that we focus on is showing farmers examples of other farmers like them who have tried something like what they want to do and have learnt something and are willing to share. And I think that is absolutely critical. Farmers learn best from other farmers. I think most people, learn from the experiences of people like them. And so sharing those stories is really important. Likewise, putting farmers together to learn from one another. And then I guess the other piece is ecological literacy and the skills to actually better understand how the soil ecosystem and the landscape is functioning. That's not something that features heavily in your average agricultural science degree. Certainly not the tools to monitor ecological health and then use that information to design farming practices and farming systems that will build soil health and build ecosystem health. So, we do a lot of work training up farmers in how to monitor soil health, simple things they can do in the paddock, and how to use that information to then inform their management practices. And a step further than that is actually helping farmers to design trials where they can experiment, see what works in their own context, because part of the challenge is there's no recipes here. Soil is incredibly variable, and from one paddock to the next, from one farm to the next, from one farming system to the next, different climates. It's just so variable. People really need to experiment and try things out. And so, I think those are some of the things. I also think that we probably need a bit of a change in the way we talk about regenerative agriculture, because it can be sometimes talked about in a way that makes people feel excluded. And so I think we really need to be careful not to say that any farm is bad because of the way that they farm, any farmer is bad because of the way that they farm. There's good reason for people to farm in the way they farm, and it's the system that they farm in and the market that they sell into. And so, I think part of it is speaking in a way that's very inclusive and supportive rather than punitive and accusatory.
So you mentioned the inherent variability of soils. So do you or does Soils for Life have a definition of healthy soils?
Not to be honest, not really. I mean, I think there are a whole range of indicators that you can look at to understand whether a soil is improving or not. But some of those things, like, some of the things that people tend to look at is the diversity of plants that are able to sustain in that soil, the amount of ground cover, the percentage of ground cover. And a lot of regenerative farmers are going for 100% ground cover 100% of the time. The way that the water infiltrates into the soil. So there's simple tests that you can do to see how long it takes a litre of water to infiltrate into the soil. I heard one person say that I know that I'm doing well if I see more species in more places more of the time. Or what did you say? New species in places I haven't seen them. And I think it was new species in places I haven't seen them before. So that's a very simple indicator, but just increasing diversity, I think, is often a really good indicator. And then there are more sort of technical indicators that you could use, and I think soil carbon is actually a really good indicator because the amount of organic carbon in soils is related to how much biological activity is going on in that soil. That carbon is a byproduct of biological activity. It's the dead bodies of creatures and the result of their life cycle, and also the dead roots from plants. And so more biology, more plants leads to more soil carbon. And so you can test soil carbon. It does tend to go up and down over time, but certainly seeing things trending up is a good thing.
Nice, thanks. Some nice discussion about, so someone said, I knew hard-hooved animals were terrible for Australian soils. However, I wasn't aware of the impacts of all agriculture on topsoil loss. I'm interested if regenerative agriculture builds new soil or just preserves what's left.
It's probably going a little out of my area of expertise. I've certainly, my understanding is that soil can be built. Soil naturally takes many thousands of years to build, but there's certainly an active debate about how fast soil can be built if you're actively trying to build it. I guess, yeah, I probably wouldn't want to definitively answer that question, can soil be built? But there are certainly, I've visited lots of farms where they have, they say that they've seen an increase in topsoil. They've measured the amount of topsoil and then measured it 10 years later and they've seen it grow.
Are there guidelines or methodologies that need to be adhered to in order to be classified as regenerative farming?
One of the most tricky questions to answer. I mean, it's not tricky to answer. No, there really aren't. I mean, there are some standards that are being developed. There's the regenerative and organic standard in the US, organic and regenerative standard in the US. There are a couple of schemes in Australia. So the ecological outcomes verification scheme, which is measuring the ecological outcomes from particular farming practices, and that will come back and measure a whole lot of things, both in the soil and above the ground, to try and understand whether a area of land is trending in the right direction. So there are some schemes that are out there. In terms of a definition of regenerative agriculture, I don't think there's an agreed definition. I mean, at Soils for Life, we define that as any system of principles and practices that leads to an improvement in soil health and a regeneration of landscape function. But it's inherently variable. And I think taking an outcomes-based approach where we're actually looking at does it improve the soil is a much better approach than a sort of tick box, have you done these practices? Because the different practices work in different places because the soil ecosystem is incredibly variable. There are some principles that tend to be fairly well accepted in terms of what regenerative agriculture looks like, and those principles are minimizing soil disturbance, so avoiding tillage, avoiding disturbing the soil and breaking up all of those fungal networks and all of the structure that's being created in the soil, aiming for 100% ground cover, so keeping the soil covered, keeping living roots in the soil, increasing diversity, and integrating animals or livestock. And the last one, I mean, there was a question about hoofed animals. I think the last thing we want to do is take animals out of a landscape, whether they be native animals or non-native animals, because again, if you look at nature, there really aren't any natural environments where there aren't animals. And so I think, the only place we really don't see animals other than urban areas is in, quite intensive like croplands and horticulture operations. And that makes it really hard to build soil health because animals play a critical role in every ecosystem.
Thanks, Ellie. Last couple of questions. How do we get soil repair and restoration practices into policy?
We're not really an advocacy organisation, so we don't spend a lot of time thinking about this. In Australia, we have a national soil strategy, which is pretty good actually, but doesn't have a huge amount of money behind it. We used to have an office of the National Soil Advocate, whose job it was to advocate across all of the different silos of government to try to integrate soil health into different policies. Look, it's really tricky. It is really tricky. I personally think that the way the tipping point may only come if we're able to make this connection between healthy soils and healthy people really tangible for people, because the vast majority of the world's population live in cities, don't have much connection to agriculture, don't have much connection to soil. And I think, in the busyness and stressfulness of life, really don't care enough about these things for it to become a political priority. But health is a priority, and we have a health crisis. A lot of the world is very micronutrient deficient, and that's quite possibly linked to the state of our soils and the state of our farming practices. So I think if we can find ways to link healthy soil to human health, that could be really transformational. The other thing I think is resilience, because healthy soils do have a function, as I said earlier, in mitigating the impact of extreme weather. We have one farmer whose farm was a pretty amazing story of how his farm fared in the lead up to the 2018-19 drought, which, for those who are dialing in from other countries, was one of the worst droughts in Australian history, ending with one of the worst fires, probably the worst fire in Australia's history. And his farm, because he had rehydrated the land, because he'd improved the water cycle, was much more hydrated. It kept growing, supporting plant life, vegetation much longer into the drought. It burnt cooler than the neighbouring properties because it had more water in the soil, and then it bounced back much faster afterwards. And so I think, it's hard because people respond to extreme weather after it happens, and extreme events like that after it happens. But I think if we can really clearly tie those sorts of experiences of farmers who fixed their ecosystems to resilience to extreme weather, which we're experiencing more and more, obviously, that may be another way to make the case for policy change.
Nice. Thanks, Ellie. I'm going to call it a day there because I've got to prepare for the next meeting. But thank you very much. Round of applause for Ellie. Great talk. And a really nice finishing point in regards to this concept for this speaker series. So we're exploring the soil gut mind connection, and also the climate change link, etc. as well. So through a planetary health lens. So thank you very much, Ellie. I'm just going to put the next talk Zoom link in the chat just in case anybody would like to join. But yeah, thanks again, Ellie. Very excellent talk tonight, and I hope everyone enjoyed it, sorry. And please feel free to join us on the other talks throughout the month. So we've got another talk next Wednesday. So Dr. Craig Lidicoats talking about the soil gut microbiome connections. And then we have Bruce Pascoe and Sarah Bassett on the Thursday talking about perennial earth. So Bruce Pascoe's quite a famous author in Australia. He's going to be talking more about the indigenous perspectives and reciprocity with the land. And Sarah's going to be talking about how to communicate effectively in the sustainability space. So please join us then. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining. And thanks again, Ellie, for your amazing talk.
Thanks, Jake. Thanks, everyone.